I really enjoyed the film. I do think, the home is sort of pun intended homecoming for you to the horror genre. It's the first horror picture you've directed in almost 10 years. So what drew you back to this genre?
Oh God, I never wanted to leave. No, I just love the genre, man. I think I'm an action horror guy at heart. It's what I grew up on. I think that was the first introduction to film, so it'll always have this special place that listen, I love every genre, but I think horror is a great vessel, and I think horror as experienced in the theaters is the greatest communal experience of all the genres. There's something about sharing that fear, that fright inside a theater, and I think that's why horror is still doing very well in the movie theaters. I think that is something that that should be experienced communally, if that's a word.
It is.
Right. So yeah, I think that's what draws me to it. Remembering those early experiences at the theater I had, being freaked out by, the early Friday the 13th, The Exorcist, Rosemary's Baby. I'm aging myself. Um, so yeah, so I think that's what brings me back to it. And I think unlike the Purge films, this is my first, I think, straight ahead horror piece. I think the Purge films were almost, I don't think Blumhouse would be happy for me saying this, but I think it was more action in an odd way, dystopian action. But this was a little more, I went straight ahead psychological horror.
Yeah, and I definitely agree. This is has a lot of horror elements, but I do think this still has like a lot of those action elements, especially in that third act.
Yes.
I hope I'm not speaking out of turn here. I thought I saw some like old boy
Oh,
in like the final sequence.
huge
Um,
influence. Yes.
yeah, but why do you think that this is like such a compelling approach in terms of like blending those genres?
Yeah, I love blending genres. I get worried. I've been criticized, I think, on certain films where I blend genre. Like I made a movie called This Is the Night a couple of years ago. And I think I was blending comedy and drama and a mob film. It was a triptych of three different stories. And sometimes I love to blend. I think I find movies that blend genre very interesting. I think sometimes the financiers get nervous that you're mixing audiences then, but I love, especially action horror, I think blend very nicely. I could see why sometimes drama and maybe drama and horror, or drama and comedy don't mix perfectly. But I think action horror is a nice, perfect blend. And I think we build to it hopefully in a smooth way so that the transition into like you said, the more actiony ending is, I think, earned and feels natural, so it doesn't feel like an abrupt change in tone.
Yeah, absolutely. And why do you think that that blend works so well between action and horror?
I think because they're both so visceral, I think that one is an extension from the other. I think horror exists in, I always say, in the in-between moments, in the empty hallway. And then action is hopefully the culmination. If you could do enough of those smaller moments, horror moments, it's the perfect culmination of the horror buildup into the action ending. And that was the hope here. So I think action is the natural extension of horror if done correctly. Hope we did it correctly here.
Yeah, no, I definitely think you did. I
Thank you.
think, you know, um, something about the home that I love, and it's something that, a lot of other movies don't do, is that it's like this really like economical storytelling, like there's a lot of like 90-minute chiller in it. Like it's just like in, out, gets it done.
Yeah.
What do you think the merits of this approach are?
Oh, listen, God, I learned so much with the Purge films. I think that especially in horror and action, I think you just got to keep it moving. You don't want people to be too ahead or too behind of the story. So you're kind of keeping them in line with your main character. Everybody's in Pete Davidson, Max's point of view. So we don't want it to linger too much where they start getting ahead of him or too far behind him. And I think if your edit, and we had various edits, like, you would imagine my first edit was 2.5, I'd say 2.5 hours. And we were just allowing the audience to think too much. And I think that, listen, there's certain movies I think that can work very well where you're allowing them to really sit there and start mulling over. But here we don't want them to ever get ahead of Pete or Max. So I think economy was very important because we're throwing a lot of stuff at them, right? We're throwing all kinds of stuff at them. So if they sit there and start really analyzing, they might jump one step ahead of Pete or Max. And I think that would be bad here. So we were it's weird you bring that up because it's such an edit. I think editing is the key component in all the aspects of filmmaking. Editing became where you almost rewrite the script. And we were like, okay, the script was probably 110 pages. And we cut pace wise, we probably cut 15 minutes out of what would be script screen time. So yeah, pacing was very important not to get ahead of the main character, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And you kind of mentioned all of these like misdirects. And I obviously don't want to go too much into spoilers. But I think there's like an art to pulling off these misdirects. What do you think is like the secret to pulling off a great twist? Obviously, without spoiling too much.
Yeah, dude, it's a hard one to talk about. It's a great question. I don't want to give anything away. We really paid attention to when you give the twist. So you have people looking in the right direction, and that should be in and of itself is interesting. And when they realize, oh my God, what we thought was happening is not really happening. What you give to them after that better be equally as compelling as what they thought it was. And I think there's movies that succeeded in that, and we really paid attention to it. Like we can't tell them this is happening and then switch it and it not be as interesting as what they believed. And that I know I'm being very elusive, but
No,
I
yeah,
think but yeah, I think that became really important to us in the writing stage. Adam and I were working, we worked on the script for quite a while during COVID together. And that was a big priority is that whatever the final reveal was, it had to be as interesting, storytelling wise, as compelling in its what it was going to offer next as what we thought was happening. That makes sense.
yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. I think that's a fantastic answer. But I think this is very much a film about subverting expectations in general, especially when it comes to like this subgenre of like old people or scary horror. It's not like your typical entry into that. It's not like this shock picture or jump scare movie. It's like you mentioned, like a conspiracy paranoia thriller. What made you want to take this approach?
I think I always looked at the Purge films as punch like I was punching people in the face. Like just these visceral kind of like just you start them, the purge starts, the sirens hit, and we're just rushing forward. I'm not really taking time to build tension a little bit in certain sequences, but here we were looking at it more. Even my producer always said it was more like a Swiss clock. It had many moving parts. And growing up on, I think one of the great influences on everything I do is Rosemary's Baby. And I just love being inside Rosemary's point of view the whole time. I wanted to tell, the Purge movies are always multi-point of views we're playing with. Here it was singular. And I just wanted to get into something where I could build tension, play more of the psychological horror like a Rosemary's Baby or any of the movies I grew up on, stuff like Burnt Offerings and The Sentinel, all these great 70s horror films. Even the Giallo stuff I loved. And I love film noir. And I thought Max's journey mirrored in a strange way. We even have the femme fatale in the movie. We were trying to mirror the great film noirs from the 40s and 30s that I grew up watching too. So yeah, it was just really getting away from the visceral punch that I thought The Purge always was, still maintaining some socio-political angle that I like to always layer into the film, whether people want to see that or not. But it was getting into more nuance, I guess, and getting to play with the camera a little more, not just being straight up handheld the entire time. So, I think we were just able to explore space and time in ways that you can't do in the Purge movie.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned, the sociopolitical angle. Obviously, the home is not as overt as the purge. The purge is,
Very overt. Yeah.
right there.
Yeah.
But I think it's unmistakably very political. What do you think are like the merits of the horror genre in using these allegorical stories to share a message?
I think they're the perfect vessel because you can do it in a way. And I think I actually failed a couple times on the Purge movies, where I became somewhat preachy. I think my own politics, I was so angry at certain times that I became a little preachy, which I think is bad. I don't think an audience wants to be preached to. So I think why horror, sci-fi, some action are great vessels for smuggling ideas in. And then so part of the audience could just watch it for hopefully a thrilling piece of entertainment. And then you have the other part of the audience that is maybe looking for that layered socio-political content. Scorsese, I read in a book years ago that Scorsese called the movies of the studio movies of the 30s and 40s smugglers cinema because a lot of the studio directors were they were hired guns and they had to make 3 or 4 military films or 3 or 4 westerns a year and they were getting very bored doing that. So they began to smuggle their own ideas into the piece, some philosophical and socio-political ideas. So we called it smuggler cinema because it was just a way to sneak ideas in. And I think Romero and Carpenter did it really great in the 70s and 80s. And and again, I think it's such a great vessel because the audience doesn't feel preached to. They can grab it if they want to. It's there, right? It's there, hopefully in a kind of like an underbelly in the film. And the other people could just say, I'm just watching a cool, fun horror film or an action film or a sci-fi film. So the vessel itself of horror, I think, is the best way to deliver something to an audience.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to this being sort of a homecoming for you, it's also like your return to like a more confined location. Like obviously the original Purge film was like a home invasion movie. Then you
Absolutely.
went out onto the streets, and now you're back into like this confined setting.
Yeah.
What appeals to you, or maybe more accurately, scares you about like this feeling of claustrophobia?
It's weird. I think it all stems from Dog Day Afternoon, and I know that's not even a horror movie, but I was obsessed with Dog Day Afternoon, my child. It was one of my favorite films. Still is. I'd put it in my top 10, I think. And there was something about the confined space of Dog Day, locking people in one, and then you're putting them in this pressure cooker, this hot situation where they can't leave. And I think not only do you get to do, horror and whatnot within that and action, but it's also the human drama that exists when you're forced into a confined space. I think is very interesting when you can't leave. Now, the home they could come and go if they want, but there's reasons we learned that they kind of don't. And the home, what was interesting about the home, it was almost the size of a city. What we were shooting, fascinating. So it was a little different than the Purge one, but it still had that confined feel. I just love it, dude. I think it comes from, we're all influenced from what we watch. And I think for our first 10 years, I think we never escape those early influences. And I can honestly say, I think just something in Dog Day, the lock, I wrote like Assault on Precinct 13 and The Negotiator were also people who couldn't leave, The Purge, you couldn't leave a confined space. And here I go again, doing it again and putting people in this pressure cooker situation, turning up the heat, both literally and figuratively. And here we go. Let's see what happens when these people are in this confined space. Let's see how they act. What does the good part of human nature, win out, or does the bad part, emerge?
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned how important like the setting is for the film, and I think it's fair to say like the setting is almost another actor in the film. What do you
Absolutely.
think is the importance of the setting in a film like this?
Dude, it was of the utmost here. It was, and we couldn't find it. We couldn't find it. We knew for there's also a practical importance to finding one location, and then there's obviously the aesthetic of the place. And we got very lucky. This was an actual retirement facility run by nuns in Jersey, northern Jersey, which closed 6 months before we were shooting, and they were going to knock it down. They actually kept it open a little longer. Not open. It was everybody had moved out. All the residents had moved out, which gave the place a very strange feel because they had just moved out, and there was still some like leftover remnants of them being there. And there was also very strange, like little documents on the wall of who died in each room because the place was open for 100 years. So it was creepy things. We actually felt it was quite haunted. And it added to the filming of because I
Yeah.
like to create the mood on set. I play a lot of music. I played a lot of Pink Floyd here, early Pink Floyd, a lot of the soundtrack from Three Women, Robert Altman's Three Women, which is quite eerie, which in and of itself is almost like a horror film at a kind of an elderly community in a spa in the desert. And a long story short, though, but yeah, you're right. That's a perfect way to say it. It's an actor in the film, and we were so lucky that everything we shot was on the premises there, and it was creepy as all hell because it was so vast, so big. It smelled weird. So everything that can contribute because it was closed for a while, and we had rats in the movie. There were rats at the place, and there were bugs, and so that all contributes. And we got just very lucky. And we almost there was actually consideration of like going to another state because we just couldn't find anything here. And then luckily I had a great location team who Henry Winnick who found it, and it was wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of actors, I think Pete Davidson's performance is very unconventional and unexpected. Like it's nothing we've ever seen him do before. I think it's fair to say, but I think he does a great job. What inspired you to cast him in like a non-comedic role like this?
Yeah, it's a great question, dude. So I knew Pete. We grew up kind of together. He lived right down the street from my parents, and where I have a house on Staten Island, and Pete has a place here too. And we got to know each other. He was a Purge fan. I was having a Purge party at a local restaurant called Nucci's, very Italian community around here, Italian and Irish. And we were doing a big first Purge party at this restaurant. Pete was still bussing tables back then. And he came over to me and said, "Oh, I know you made the Purge, and I loved it." And we just kind of hit it off. He was this great kid. He was getting into, he was pre-SNL. And we just started talking, and then he got SNL, and he became this big star in a way, and for many different reasons. But I knew Pete as just a regular guy, and I knew he was a very soulful man. I knew what he went through in his life, and we kind of got along. Staten Island is a very unique place. It's hyper masculine, tough place, and Pete and I never really truly fit in. We felt like we were always a little bit, so we bonded over that. And when Adam and I were writing the script, I was actually writing a script right before COVID with Pete in his mom's basement. I'll never forget. I go, and it was, and then we had COVID, and we were just kind of talking on Zoom, and Adam and I were writing in our backyard because our families were in the same bubble. Remember the whole thing? You're in the bubble with one family. So Adam's children played with my daughter, And we came up with the home and we were talking about, well, who's a 26-year-old, 27-year-old star? And we're like, well, we're never going to get Chalamet, so that's not going to. And then it just hit us. Oh my God, he's right up the street from us. It's Pete. Pete has we knew he had the emotional range just because we know him as a human. I thought he showed a little bit in Big Time Adolescence and King of
Yeah,
Staten.
for sure.
A little bit, you saw a little more than just a comedic side. And he always wanted to do something different. He loves horror. And we showed him the script. He was in, and it kind of just, and I also knew that he would bring, Pete's been through some trauma in his life, and so is Max. And he brought a lot of that. I knew he could relate to the character of Max, and he would bring that, what he went through in his childhood and what Max went through. There was a parallel, and I think he brought that to the piece. And I think he's fantastic in the movie. I was beyond surprised. I remember telling his mom came to set one day. I'm like, how did he learn to act like like he- he's working with Tony Award-winning actors, Jessica Heck, then Mary Beth Peil, and Stuart Rudin. It was, multiple Migs from Silence of the Lambs and Bruce Altman and all these wonderful Ethan Johnny Phelps. Like these are all Broadway trained, say Shakespearean trained actors, and Pete's just weaving between them as if he's done this a million times. So it was great to see. Great to see.